Okay, hello and welcome to the next video. So let's continue where we left off. So in this video, what we want to do is to pretty much work on the sign up and the sign in pages. And to do that, we're going to use Redux Form. So it's going to be a bit of a process, but it's nothing that we can't do. So first of all, I need to quit this running process because I need to actually install that Redux form. So I'm going to go into the client folder, and once there I'm going to go npm install -- save and then Redux form. Speaking of Redux form, we're going to need a couple of more things. So we need to include Redux as well as React Redux. So install these three things and then we can move on. So while this is installing, I'm going to go back to this source directory, and inside components we already made a placeholder component for the sign up and the sign in. So in this sign up, what I want to do is, well, first of all, I need to include or import something from that Redux form that we just installed. So Redux form like this, and what we need to use is something called Redux form as well as a field component like this. Okay, so then inside of our render method, we need to change this JSX a bit. So inside of this div, we want to have actual form. Okay, we'll worry a bit later about how to submit the form. But then we're going to need to have two field sets. One field set will contain the email input and other field set will contain the password input. So I need the field set tags, and let me actually copy and paste them. Okay, like this. So in this first one, we need to use this field that we just imported. So I'm going to type fields, and then we need to specify a lot of different details. So first is the field's name, so we're going to say something like email. Then its type, well, its type is going to be a simple text. Then in case we want ID, and sure, why not, we'll call it the same as our name. Okay, and then we need to specify the actual component that this Redux form will render in this place. So we just want to have a simple input component like this. Okay, and we're going to do the same for the passwords. It's going to be slightly different, but pretty much the same. So it's going to be field, name is going to be passwords, type is going to be this time password because we don't want our password to be shown during us typing it. And then for the ID we're going to say password as well, and for the component it's going to be input once more. Okay, like this. Then just before the end of this form we want to have some type of button for submission. So we're going to say we need a button, and type is going to be submit, and the text is going to be sign up or something like that. Okay, so now before we can actually wire this up, we need to set up some Redux boilerplate so that we can actually connect this form over here. We give it some name and we connect it with Redux form in the Redux sense, if that makes sense. So what we need to do is we need to create two additional folders. One will house all of our reducers, and other one will house all of our actions. So I'm going to come here and create a new folder. Let's call it reducers, and let me create another folder and it's going to be actions like this. Okay, so in this reducers folder we're going to store an index file that will be like a mapping of all of our reducers, and then the individual files for every different reducer that we have in this application. So index.js for that mapping, and I'm going to do the authentication reducer a bit later because right now we just want to wire this Redux form. So inside of here we need access to combine reducers, which is stored in the reducer module that we just installed. So I'm going to import combine reducers like this from Redux, and then we need to export default combine reducers, and we need to pass it an object. This object is pretty much like key value mapping. So on the left we have like a key name, and on the right we have the actual value that is going to be mapped to it. So for now we just want to handle that form, so we're going to say let's call it a form, and we need now to get a handle to that form reducer. Now that form reducer is actually stored in, you can probably guess it, inside of the Redux form package. So we need to import it as well. So I'm going to import, it's called actually just reducer, and then from Redux form like this. Now, well, this entire folder is actually called reducers, and if we have something that is only about forms called reducer itself, it's going to be slightly confusing, so we can actually rename that. We just need to add the keyword as, and then we need to type a new name. So I'm going to go with form reducer like this, and then over here we can just use this value over here like this. I'm going to put semicolons here, and we can save this file. Okay, so now what we need to do is we need to come back here, and we need to use this other piece that we imported but haven't used thus far. So first of all, we need to get rid of this export default from here. It served us well when we wanted to see this placeholder working, but not any longer. So we actually need to move that over here. So I'm going to type export default. We need to use this Redux form from above. And then this Redux form will take one argument, but it's going to wrap some component. So it's going to wrap this entire component called SignUp. So it's a bit weird, like usage pattern, but you'll get used to it pretty soon. And then inside of Redux form as argument, we're going to actually pass in an object, and that object will have one property called form. And then we simply need to specify the name of this form that Redux form will actually register in the Redux. So because this form is all about the sign up process, I'm going to simply call it sign up like this. And then we can save this, and then I'm going to restart the process. So I first of all need to go back, and then npm run start dev. Let's see if we have any errors or something like that, and then this is what we get. I'm also going to open the Google Dev Tools and open the console. So now if I click on the sign up, okay, that's a lot of things. Okay, so we definitely did forget to wire in the Redux in our index.js file, which can happen at times. So let's do that next. Okay, so we need to go back to this index.js file over here, and we need to import a couple of things from React Redux and then also from the Redux. So because we're importing from the node module specifically, I'm going to include that import statement in this section over here. So from the Redux, we're going to import a create store method from Redux like this. And from the React Redux, we're going to import the provider from React Redux like this. Okay, then what we need to do is we need to wrap this browser router with this provider, and then we need to set as a property to that provider a store which we'll create using this create store. Okay, so to get started, let me actually use this provider tag, and then I'm going to cut this part and put it below this, and then I'll indent this. Okay, so inside of this provider, we're going to set a store as, because it's JavaScript, I need to use these squiggly braces. So then it's going to be create store, and then we need to pass the reducers as well as like the default state. So what we need to do is we need to now import the reducers, this file over here, but because that's like our custom made file, I'm going to import it over here. So import reducers from .reducers, and that can work because it's index.js. You don't need to specify it like this, so we can just leave it like this. Okay, and then create store will take in the reducers as well as empty objects. Okay, so now let's see if this will work now. And we can see that it's working, it's not complaining. Okay, so now I can type something here, I can type something here, I can click sign up. Of course nothing happens because we didn't handle the on submission part yet. But okay, so first of all you see that this style is definitely not looking like the rest. So we're not using Bootstrap right now because we haven't used any Bootstrap classes for this, and that's something that we want to handle next. So I'm going to open the sign up component over here, and let's fix one of the easiest thing. I can at least give some class to this sign up. So I can say class name equal button and then button primary, for example, and that should work. Okay, now to actually style these inputs, it's going to be a bit more trickier than just like including class name over here, because in order to style these fields inside of a Redux form, you actually need to create your own custom component, and then instead of using the default input one, you need to use it over here. Okay, so I'm going to create a new file. Let's call it custom input.js. So that's going to be our custom input component, and inside of here I'm pretty sure you know the started list. We need to import the React, and we'll also import a component. We'll make this to be a class-based React component, so import those two from React. Okay, so then we need to create a new class component. We're going to say it's called custom input extends component. Okay, and we can also export default it. Okay, and then so what we need to do is we'll have render method, and inside of this render method we can pretty much like return the JSX that you would usually do if you were using Bootstrap. So what I exactly mean is, for example, we can have like div with the class name of form group as per Bootstrap specifications, and then inside of this form group we can have two more tags. We can have actual label, and we can have the actual input over here. Okay, so now how is this going to work is pretty much these fields over here, we can set them up to use this custom input as their component base, and then whatever we pass to this field over here, this custom input will receive as props, and then we can actually like use that data throughout this custom input, and it can remain in that generic sense. Like you can use it many times over and over for different projects and whatnot. So to demonstrate that, let's say that we're going to create a label over here, and we're going to say like enter your email, for example. Now to get access to this text over here, enter your email, we can simply come over here. We can use squiggly braces because we're going to be typing some JS code, and then we can say this.props.label, for example. And using this pattern, we can fill all of these custom inputs code over here. So what we want to do is we can say label HTML4, and then we can say this.props.id, which is actually this value over here because it's assigned to ID. And then inside of these inputs, we can do a lot of things. For example, we can fill in the name, which is going to be stored in this.props.name. We can store the ID, which we actually got over here, so this.props.id. We can also use placeholder, for example. We can say it's going to be stored as props.placeholder, but because we don't have it yet, we can come here and say placeholder equals, and then we can say maybe like example at example.com, for example. So that's going to be pulled in over here. Next, and now this is the interesting part, finally we can use a class name. So this is how we style our Redux form. So we can say class name is form control. Next, you remember that type between password and regular text. Well, we can use it the same way, this.props.type, and it'll simply use it from these values over here. And then what we need to do, we need to set two more values. One is called the value and one is called the onChange. To do that, this is like a good best practice. We can pull them over here. So we're going to say input contains value and onChange, and that is all taken from this.props. And then over here we can simply say value equals value, and onChange equals onChange, like this. And this file should be good to go now, I think. But what we need to do is we need to come back to this SignUp file over here and actually import this custom input component before we can actually see any changes. So I'm going to say import custom input from custom input, like this. And then for both of these fields we can set this component equals to custom input that we just imported, and here as well, input, like this. Now this second field is missing these two things, so I'm going to add them really quickly. So label is going to be enter your password, and the placeholder is going to be your super password, for example. Now if I save this and I come back to this side, now you can see that it is styled properly, and you can see the Bootstrap styles pretty much. Okay, so now if you remember this diagram that you've seen in previous video, you remember that the sign up and sign in pages should contain like two main pieces. We now handle the left hand side piece, but we still need to do the right hand side piece, so let's do that really quickly. So what we want to do is we need to edit this sign up component once again, and we need to make use of some columns. So I'm going to turn this div into a class name of column, like this. And then I need to add like another tag which is going to have a class name of row. And then I need to move this ending div tag for that row all the way to the bottom, and then I need to indent this. So this is going to be like left column, and then we need to create another column over here. So div class name equals column again, and over here we're going to say something on the right hand side. So for example, this is right hand side. Okay, and it is. So let's work on this for a bit. So Bootstrap has this handy alert class name. So we're going to say a div of class name alert, and then alert primary. And over here we're going to say something like or sign up using third-party services. And if we test that, yes, you can see that it's starting to look like that mockup. But now let's center this text horizontally. So we're going to wrap this alert in div of class name text center, like this. And let's see if that worked. Okay, it did. And now we need two buttons for the Google and Facebook. So let's create button. We can say class name or class name of button default, for example, and we can say it's going to be a Facebook, and the other one is going to be Google. And okay, it now works. Another thing that you can notice really quickly is that this nav bar over here doesn't really have any margins before the main content, so we can fix that really easily. We just need to edit this header component a bit. So in this like most root level tag, the nav one over here, we need to add a bit of custom styling. So I'm going to say style equals, I need to use squiggly braces because we need to add some JS code, but because the JS code that we're adding is actually like an object, it's going to have like a double set of these, and then we're going to say margin bottom, and we want to say 30 pixels. So now that should be fixed. Okay, great. Okay, so now for the actual handling the actual clicking of these two buttons, so like what happens when you click Facebook and what happens when you click Google, we're going to use two different dependencies for that, and those two dependencies will allow the React to actually talk with Facebook and Google and get us access token. And once the front end actually has that access token, then we can use the React and actually send that to the backend to exchange it for the JSON Web Token. On the other side, on this local signup part over here, we're going to use a few more methods of the Redux form, mainly handle submit, to actually pull these two values that user typed in and to actually send to the backend. So to do that part, we're going to navigate back to the signup, and then we need to create a new method in this class of ours. So we're going to say, okay, so we need a method that will get called once submit event happens. So we can say like on submit, for example, and this is going to be our method over here. So to test things out quickly, we can have some console log statement inside and say like on submit got called, for example. And then what we need to do is to fiddle with this form tag for a bit. Before we do that, one really good like practice is to pull the handle submit method over here. So we're going to do that. So we're going to say pull the handle submit from equals this.props, like this, and then in this form tag over here that is responsible for the entire form, we'll say on this event called submit do something, and that do something is going to be, we're going to call that handle submit method that we used from the props. And just to let you know, like we have access to this method because we're using Redux form, otherwise it wouldn't be here. And then we need to pass it pretty much like what custom method that we made should handle this submission, and this is the method that we made. So we're going to say this, and then on submit. Just make sure not to call it over here because you don't want to invoke it once the code is parsed, but just to pass it to this event. Okay, so now we can test this. I'm going to save this and go back. Let's refresh, and then I'm going to type something and click sign up, and you can see that on submit got called over here. Now this on submit is going to receive some data, so we can say data, or you can also say like form data, whatever you want, and let's console log out that as well. So I'm going to say form data and then say form data. Okay, and let's say test at gmail.com super password sign up, and we see that. Okay, so what we're going to do in the future, we're going to use these values, we're going to use Axios, and we're going to create a couple of actions, and then we're going to be communicating back and forth with our backend, and things will happen. So I hope you enjoyed this video. This video was mainly about integrating the Redux form and also integrating the actual Redux itself inside of our index file. and as well as styling Redux form. So it's pretty much about Redux form, and in the next video, like I said, we're going to get started on these sections. So I hope you enjoyed this video, that you learned something, and I'll see you in the next video once we start working on the actual actions. Thanks for watching and see you then.